It was a typical morning at the precinct, just like any other. Officers moved in and out of the building with their routines. Conversations blurred into a hum of chatter and footsteps. Maya Turner was one of the figures drifting through the crowd. With her quiet demeanor and unassuming presence, she didn't stand out much. She seemed like the type who preferred to stay under the radar. For most of her colleagues, Maya was just another face in the room, a name on a badge. But there was more to Maya than met the eye. Behind her seemingly ordinary exterior lay a story and a purpose that none of her colleagues could have guessed. She wasn't just any officer. She held a rank, a position of authority that would have stunned her peers had they known. Yet Maya moved through her day without a hint of this hidden power, keeping her purpose masked by a simple uniform and a calm, almost invisible presence. Maya's reserved nature often led people to make assumptions. She knew what they saw: a woman who kept her head down, blended in, and didn't make waves. It was easier to let people think she was just another junior officer. She learned long ago that people often reveal their true colors when they don't know who's watching. And that was exactly what she intended. She had spent years mastering the art of silence, of observing while remaining overlooked, and it had become her secret weapon. This strategy worked well, especially with people like Officer Barnes. He was the precinct's self-proclaimed top officer, always eager to flaunt his authority. Barnes carried himself with an air of superiority that was hard to ignore. His tone often bordered on condescending, his gaze sharp and scrutinizing. To him, Maya was just another face in a sea of newcomers, a rookie unworthy of his respect or attention. And Maya didn't mind it. In fact, she found it useful. Each time Barnes walked by, Maya felt the familiar wave of his dismissive attitude. He would barely acknowledge her, often offering nothing more than a curt nod or a muttered greeting. He treated her with a casual indifference, assuming that she, like so many others, was beneath him. But Maya didn't react. She held her ground, maintaining her quiet composure. She watched, she listened, and she waited, allowing Barnes to continue underestimating her. Every small dismissive gesture only served to fuel her patience. To those who didn't know her, Maya appeared content with her position, quietly fulfilling her duties without complaint. But there was a purpose behind her silence, a reason for her subtle invisibility. She was not here to blend in. She was here for a purpose, one that she had every intention of fulfilling when the time was right. It was a matter of patience, of letting the right moment reveal itself. And until then, Maya was content to play her part, allowing Barnes and the others to continue believing whatever they wanted. As she went about her work, Maya kept a mental note of everything around her. She noticed the way people interacted, the way certain officers behaved when they thought no one of importance was around. Her eyes missed nothing, and her ears caught even the smallest of whispers. Maya was collecting a story, piece by piece, building a picture that would eventually reveal the truth she needed. To Barnes, however, Maya was still invisible. He continued to dismiss her, treating her as though she were inconsequential. He often made pointed comments, throwing around his authority with an air of smugness. He would bark orders in her direction, expecting her to jump to his command. But Maya, ever composed, carried out her duties with a quiet, almost serene efficiency that only seemed to irritate him further. There was something about her calmness, her refusal to react, that made him feel unsettled. But he brushed it off, attributing her demeanor to simple compliance. Yet, beneath Maya's calm exterior, there was a quiet strength. She had weathered storms that most people could barely imagine. Her silence was not submission, it was strategy. Every time Barnes tried to belittle her, every time he threw another order her way, Maya felt her resolve strengthen. She knew that the moment of truth would come, and when it did, everything would fall into place. She didn't need to force it. She only needed to wait. The precinct bustled around her as she continued her work, blending into the background while keeping her focus sharp. She remained aware of every movement, every conversation. She was looking for something, though no one around her knew what. Each piece of the puzzle was fitting together, bringing her closer to the moment she had been waiting for. And though she held her cards close to her chest, Maya was more prepared than anyone realized. One of her colleagues, Officer Jenkins, had noticed her calm diligence and once asked her why she seemed so unaffected by Barnes' antics. She had simply smiled and replied, "Patience is a virtue." It was a phrase she lived by, one that had become her guiding principle. She knew that true power didn't need to be flaunted. It was best held in reserve, waiting until the perfect moment to make its impact. And when that moment came, Maya would be ready. Barnes continued to see her as an easy target, someone he could boss around without fear of pushback. He had no idea that his every word and action were being observed, catalogued, and stored for a purpose he couldn't possibly foresee. Each time he looked down on her, Maya saw it as a reminder of why she was here. She knew that patience would reward her, and that soon enough, the truth would emerge in a way that no one, especially Barnes, could ignore. For now, Maya remained in the background, her presence unremarkable, her actions quiet. But every day brought her closer to the moment she'd been waiting for, the moment when her true purpose would be revealed. And when that time came, she knew that her silence would speak louder than any words ever could. Maya's presence in the precinct went largely unnoticed by most, but to Officer Barnes, she was an anomaly, something that didn't quite belong. Barnes had always had a way of singling people out, especially those who he thought were beneath him. For Barnes, hierarchy was everything, and Maya's quiet nature seemed to be an invitation for him to flaunt his authority. She didn't seek his approval, didn't rush to greet him, didn't attempt to ingratiate herself as others did, and to Barnes, this was unforgivable. One morning, as Maya was quietly working at her desk, Barnes approached her with his usual swagger. His tone was curt, almost dismissive, as he handed her a stack of paperwork. "New recruits usually start with filing. Maybe if you can handle that, we'll see about giving you something more challenging," he said, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Maya took the stack without a word, her expression calm, betraying nothing. She nodded, acknowledging his request with a quiet, "Understood, Officer Barnes." She could feel his eyes on her, expecting a reaction, perhaps hoping for a hint of frustration or annoyance. But Maya gave him nothing. She simply turned back to her work, meticulously organizing the files. Barnes lingered, his smirk fading slightly. Her calm response seemed to unsettle him. She hadn't reacted as he'd expected, and her unflinching composure felt almost like defiance. But instead of walking away, Barnes leaned in a bit closer, lowering his voice as he added, "Not everyone's cut out for this, you know. Some people just aren't meant to handle real responsibility." Maya felt the subtle jab, but she remained silent, her expression unreadable. She knew Barnes was testing her, trying to elicit a response, but she refused to give him that satisfaction. She continued her work, her mind focused, her patience steady. Days passed, and Barnes' attitude only grew more condescending. Every morning, he would drop off a fresh stack of reports on her desk, always with a remark that bordered on disdain. "Let's see if you can manage this without getting overwhelmed," he'd say, or "I know it's a lot, but we all have to start somewhere." To him, she was a new recruit in need of humbling, someone who should know her place. But what Barnes didn't realize was that Maya had faced challenges far greater than paperwork or his thinly veiled insults. She had seen and experienced things that would have shaken even the most seasoned officers. His attempts to undermine her were trivial in comparison, and though his comments were meant to belittle her, Maya took each one in stride, storing them away as reminders of the task at hand. One afternoon, as she was quietly working through her assignments, Barnes approached her with a group of his fellow officers in tow. They were laughing, exchanging inside jokes, their camaraderie built on shared arrogance. Barnes took this opportunity to put her on the spot. "Hey, Turner," he called out, loud enough for the others to hear. "We were just talking about that tactical raid last month. I don't think you'd know much about that, would you? Not exactly rookie-level stuff." He chuckled, his eyes glinting with smug amusement. The others joined in, laughing along. some glancing at Maya with a mix of pity and amusement. But Maya remained calm, her gaze steady as she looked at Barnes. She gave a faint smile, acknowledging his comment without giving anything away. "Maybe one day, Officer Barnes," she replied simply, her tone respectful yet firm. "For now, I'm just here to learn." The laughter faded, and Barnes seemed taken aback by her response. He had expected her to be rattled, perhaps even embarrassed, but her calmness seemed to throw him off balance. She hadn't given him the reaction he wanted, and this only deepened his frustration. As the days wore on, Barnes escalated his efforts. He began assigning her tasks that were deliberately tedious, piling on extra work in an attempt to wear her down. Each time he handed her a new stack of files, he would make a snide comment as if trying to remind her of her supposed inferiority. One day, he even went so far as to question her presence directly. "You don't seem to fit in here, Turner," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "This precinct isn't exactly for the faint of heart. Are you sure you're up for it?" Maya looked at him steadily, her gaze unwavering. "I can handle it, officer," she replied, her voice calm. There was no anger, no frustration, just a quiet confidence that left Barnes momentarily speechless. But Barnes wasn't one to back down easily. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice as he said, "I've seen people like you come and go. They think they can handle it, but when things get tough, they're the first to crack. Let's hope you're not one of them." Maya met his gaze, her expression still and composed. She didn't respond, letting his words hang in the air. Inside, however, she felt her resolve strengthen. She knew why she was here, and she wouldn't let anyone, least of all Barnes, deter her from her purpose. The tension between them continued to simmer, each exchange adding another layer to the unspoken conflict. Barnes was relentless, testing her limits, looking for any sign of weakness. But Maya remained unshaken, her patience unwavering. She knew that his arrogance would eventually be his downfall, and she was prepared to wait as long as it took. Maya's quiet resilience was her greatest strength, a quality that Barnes could neither understand nor tolerate. He saw her calmness as a challenge, an affront to his authority. But what he didn't realize was that every word, every action, was only bringing him closer to the inevitable moment when Maya's true purpose would be revealed. The days in the precinct stretched on, each one a test of Maya's patience. Barnes continued to assert his authority, taking every opportunity to remind her of her place. Maya endured it all in silence, watching him with an unbroken calm that seemed to go unnoticed by everyone, except Barnes himself. Each time he tried to belittle her, she felt his frustration deepen, his determination to break her resolve intensify. But Maya knew she was playing a longer game, and her patience was not easily shaken. One afternoon, Barnes ramped up his tactics, assigning her a mountain of paperwork, each file thicker and more tedious than the last. He had found an excuse to load her with backlogged case files, the kind that most officers avoided because of their complexity and low priority. As he dropped the stack on her desk with a mocking grin, he sneered, "Let's see if you can get through this. It's not rookie work after all. Might be a little too advanced for you, Turner." Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she gave him a nod and quietly set to work, methodically combing through each document. Barnes lingered nearby, watching her reaction, perhaps waiting for some sign of fatigue or frustration. But she kept her focus, her hand steady as she flipped through pages, her expression revealing nothing. The more he tried to rattle her, the calmer she seemed, as though each slight only reinforced her composure. Barnes eventually walked away, shaking his head in frustration, his plan foiled once again. What he didn't know was that Maya had begun to notice small details, details that might have seemed insignificant to anyone else, but were glaringly obvious to her trained eye. As she sifted through the files, she started to see patterns, discrepancies that hinted at something unusual. The cases in the files shared a strange commonality, a thread that connected them in subtle ways. It was almost as if these files had been purposefully neglected, buried under the weight of the precinct's bureaucracy. Maya kept this observation to herself, her mind already at work piecing together the puzzle. Each evening, after hours of meticulously working through the cases, Maya would quietly take notes, jotting down her findings in a small notebook she kept tucked in her bag. The more she documented, the clearer the connections became, revealing a trail that led back to something much bigger. But she didn't let on, not even a hint. She knew that any sign of interest in these files would only alert Barnes, and the last thing she needed was his attention on her investigation. Barnes, however, wasn't done. He doubled down on his efforts to make her life difficult, assigning her tasks meant to undermine her focus. One day, he ordered her to reorganize the evidence room, a job typically reserved for junior officers, time-consuming and physically demanding. Maya didn't object. She accepted the task with her usual quiet grace, setting to work without complaint. As she sorted through boxes of evidence, she took note of items that seemed out of place, subtle anomalies that most people wouldn't have given a second thought. Piece by piece, Maya was assembling a bigger picture, a picture that Barnes couldn't even begin to comprehend. As she returned from the evidence room that day, her clothes dusted with remnants from hours of sorting, Barnes crossed her path, his smirk widening at the sight of her. "Hard day's work, Kerner?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Hope it wasn't too much for you." Maya met his gaze steadily, her expression calm. "Nothing I can't handle," she replied, her tone measured. There was no defiance in her voice, just a quiet confidence that seemed to unsettle him. She went about her work, her every move deliberate, every glance careful. Maya's small actions were like quiet rebellions, subtle reminders that she was not as easily swayed as he assumed. Each task Barnes threw her way, each attempt to shake her resolve, only served to strengthen her purpose. Her patience became her shield, her silence her most potent weapon. And yet, even as she endured his attempts to undermine her, she continued to observe. She started to notice things about Barnes himself, his routines, his habits, his interactions with others. She noted how he tended to stay late, often locking himself in his office, and how certain officers seemed to steer clear of him. There was a tension in the air whenever he walked by, a sense of unease that clung to his presence. Maya's instincts told her that this was more than just arrogance. There was something he was hiding, something that no one else had noticed. One evening, as she was finishing up her shift, Maya spotted Barnes hurrying out of the building, a folder clutched tightly under his arm. He didn't notice her standing nearby, his attention fixed on something else. She watched as he quickly slipped into his car, casting a glance over his shoulder before driving off into the night. There was something about his urgency, the way he gripped the folder, that piqued her interest. She filed the observation away, another piece of the puzzle she was steadily building. Maya continued her work in silence, enduring the disrespect and disregard from Barnes and the others, but her mind was never idle. With each passing day, she grew more certain that her purpose here was more significant than anyone could have guessed. Her quiet observations, her unspoken resilience, were all leading toward something. And though Barnes saw her as nothing more than a compliant subordinate, Maya knew that she was closer than ever to uncovering the truth. As she closed another case file one evening, a faint smile crossed her face. The pieces were beginning to fit together, the patterns becoming clear. Maya could see the endgame now, and she knew that when the time was right, everything would come to light. She was patient, and she was ready. The precinct was bustling as usual, officers moving between tasks, the hum of chatter and footsteps filling the air. Maya had been quietly working in the background, maintaining her steady, composed demeanor, just as she always had. But today was different. Today, she felt the weight of months of patience and observation lifting, giving way to the moment she'd been waiting for. The pieces had finally aligned, and she was ready to bring everything to light. Barnes was at his desk, barking orders and managing a steady stream of cases with his usual arrogance. To him, it was just another day. He hadn't noticed that Maya had been observing him closely over the past weeks, that every sneer, Every dismissive comment he'd thrown her way had only brought her closer to the truth. And now, armed with all the evidence she had gathered, she was prepared to confront him in a way he would never see coming. Around noon, a meeting was called in the main conference room. Most of the precinct's officers were present, including Barnes, who took his seat near the head of the table, looking every bit the part of a man in charge. He leaned back in his chair, his usual smug expression plastered on his face, confident in his status and the respect he commanded from his colleagues. He barely spared a glance at Maya as she entered the room, taking a seat at the far end of the table, unassuming as ever. The precinct's captain entered, silencing the room with a nod. He cleared his throat and looked around, his gaze settling briefly on Maya before addressing the room. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "Today, we're addressing some serious issues that have come to our attention. And to help us understand the scope of the situation, we have a very special officer among us. Someone who has been here under special assignment, gathering critical information." A murmur spread through the room, officers glancing at each other in confusion. Barnes sat up straighter, his expression shifting from relaxed to wary. He looked around, clearly searching for an explanation, but his eyes never landed on Maya, who sat quietly, her face a mask of calm. The captain's voice cut through the murmurs. "Officer Maya Turner," he announced, gesturing for her to stand. "Please join me at the front." Maya rose from her seat, her steps steady as she moved to the head of the room, every eye on her now. There was a subtle strength in her posture, a quiet authority that had always been there, but had gone unnoticed. As she stood before them, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a badge, one that glinted under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was not the badge of a junior officer, but one that signified her true status, a federal agent. The room fell silent, stunned. Barnes' face drained of color as he stared at her, his mouth slightly open in shock. The smugness that had defined his every interaction with her had vanished, replaced by an expression of disbelief and dawning fear. Maya looked directly at Barnes, her gaze unwavering. "For the past several months, I've been here under special assignment with the FBI's Internal Affairs Division," she began, her voice calm but resolute. "My task was to investigate allegations of misconduct and corruption within this precinct." She paused, letting her words sink in. "And through my observations, I've uncovered serious evidence of abuse of power, misuse of authority, and unethical behavior." Barnes shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. The officers around him looked at him with expressions ranging from surprise to suspicion, as if seeing him in a new light for the first time. Maya continued, her voice clear and unwavering. "Officer Barnes, you've been under investigation for multiple counts of professional misconduct. Your actions, both on and off the job, have repeatedly violated the ethical standards expected of law enforcement officers. The evidence we've gathered includes documented cases of harassment, abuse of authority, and even manipulation of case files." Barnes tried to interject, his voice a weak echo of its usual commanding tone. This is ridiculous," he stammered. "I don't know what you're talking about." Maya's gaze was steady as she continued, not giving him a chance to deflect. "For months, I endured your attempts to undermine my work, to belittle me, and to force me into compliance. But each action you took, each word you spoke, was another piece of evidence, another example of your disregard for your position and the people around you." The captain stepped forward, a stern expression on his face. "Officer Barnes, the evidence Agent Turner has provided leaves no room for doubt. We have witnesses, documents, and even surveillance footage that corroborate her findings. Effective immediately, you are suspended from duty pending a full investigation, and charges will be filed accordingly." Barnes' face twisted with panic, his composure shattered. He stood, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes darting around the room as though he could somehow talk his way out of this. But there was no escape. The walls were closing in, and he realized with a sickening dread that his career, his reputation, was crumbling before him. Maya took one last look at him, her expression resolute. "You underestimated me, Barnes. You thought you could intimidate me, silence me. But you forgot that power doesn't come from belittling others. True strength is found in integrity, in standing up for what's right. And today, you're finally facing the consequences of your actions." With those words, she turned away, her task complete. The officers around her looked at her with a mix of admiration and awe, as if seeing her for the first time. Barnes, meanwhile, was escorted from the room, his head bowed, his arrogance replaced by shame. As Maya took her seat, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. Justice had been served, not through anger or retaliation, but through patience and resilience. She had upheld the very values she believed in. And now, the truth had finally come to light. The revelation of Maya's true role as an undercover FBI agent sent shockwaves through the precinct. For months, she had been the quiet observer, the unassuming figure who had blended into the background, meticulously noting every transgression, every misuse of power. Now, with the truth exposed, her quiet patience and resilience were finally understood by everyone around her. She was no longer the overlooked officer in the corner. She was someone who had dismantled the web of misconduct with calm precision. As Barnes was escorted out of the conference room, flanked by internal affairs officers, a palpable silence hung in the air. His once commanding presence was reduced to a shadow of itself, his arrogance replaced by shame and humiliation. He had spent months believing himself untouchable, his authority absolute. But now his downfall was on full display for all to see. The same officers who had once followed his orders without question now looked at him with a mix of disappointment and contempt. Barnes faced an immediate suspension, but the consequences didn't end there. Over the following days, more evidence surfaced, adding weight to the charges against him. Internal Affairs conducted a thorough investigation into his conduct, uncovering a trail of ethical violations, instances of harassment, and even evidence of tampering with case files to suit his agenda. What had started as subtle suspicions had blossomed into an undeniable body of evidence, one that Barnes could no longer evade. For Maya, the days following the reveal marked a profound shift in how she was perceived by her colleagues. The officers who had once dismissed her, who had seen her as just another junior officer, now regarded her with a newfound respect. They understood, perhaps for the first time, the quiet strength and purpose she had carried. Whispers of her patience, her resilience, and the way she had handled Barnes' hostility spread throughout the precinct. Where once she had been underestimated, now she was respected, admired even. She had shown them that real power didn't need to be flaunted. It was best wielded with integrity and restraint. Maya's work, however, was not yet complete. She was called to present her findings in a formal report, outlining every detail of her investigation, each instance of misconduct that Barnes had committed. As she stood before a panel of senior officers and officials, she recounted the months she had spent gathering evidence, the methods she had used to document his actions, and the lengths she had gone to ensure that every accusation was backed by solid proof. Her words were calm, direct, and authoritative, a stark contrast to the quiet demeanor she had maintained throughout her assignment. The panel listened intently, their expressions shifting from surprise to solemnity as they absorbed the full extent of Barnes' transgressions. By the end of her testimony, there was no doubt left in anyone's mind about the justice of her actions. Her findings had exposed a systemic issue, one that had allowed individuals like Barnes to exploit their positions unchecked. It was a sobering reminder of the responsibility that came with the badge, a call for greater accountability within the precinct. Barnes' fate was sealed shortly after Maya's report. Stripped of his rank, he was dismissed from the force and faced legal charges for his actions. His career, once marked by a string of promotions and accolades, had crumbled in the face of his own arrogance and misconduct. There would be no second chances, no redemption. The very power he had abused had now turned against him, leaving him with nothing but a reputation tarnished beyond repair. In the days that followed, Maya continued her work at the precinct, but now her role carried a new weight. Her colleagues approached her with respect, some even expressing their admiration for the way she had handled the investigation. She was no longer the invisible officer who blended into the background. Her presence now commanded a quiet authority, one rooted in her unwavering integrity and dedication to justice. One afternoon, as she passed through the precinct, she was stopped by Officer Jenkins, a fellow colleague who had always treated her with kindness, but had, like many others, underestimated her. He looked at her with a smile, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Agent Turner," he began, using her formal title for the first time, "I think we all learned a lesson from you. You reminded us what it means to truly serve and protect." Maya offered a nod, her expression one of quiet acknowledgement. She hadn't sought recognition or validation, but the respect of her peers was a testament to the impact of her actions. She had proven that integrity mattered, that justice was worth pursuing even in the face of adversity. Her purpose had never been about personal gain. It had always been about holding people accountable, about creating an environment where abuse of power could not thrive. As she continued her work, the precinct began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. The leadership took her findings seriously, implementing stricter protocols and creating channels for officers to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. Maya's investigation had set off a ripple effect, one that fostered a culture of transparency and accountability. She had done more than expose Barnes. She had paved the way for a better, fairer precinct. In the quiet moments, Maya reflected on the journey that had led her here, the patience it had required, the strength it had taken to endure Barnes' mistreatment without losing focus on her mission. She knew that real change was never easy, that justice often required sacrifice and resilience, but she also knew that it was worth it. Standing in the precinct, surrounded by colleagues who now saw her for who she truly was, Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Her work was far from over, but she had set a standard, one that would hopefully inspire others to follow in her footsteps. In the end, Barnes had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the consequences of underestimating others. And Maya Turner, once the quiet observer, had become a symbol of justice, a testament to the strength found in patience and integrity. As Maya continued her work, her presence in the precinct now symbolized more than just an agent on assignment. She had become a beacon of quiet strength, a reminder that justice wasn't always loud or forceful. Sometimes it was a steady, unwavering resolve, patient but powerful. Her story resonated among her peers, reminding them that true integrity doesn't need to be showcased or flaunted. It simply requires a commitment to doing what's right, no matter how long the journey or how difficult the path. Maya had shown that resilience is often found in silence, in the ability to endure and observe, gathering strength until the right moment presents itself. Her patience had allowed her to see clearly, to wait until every piece was in place before revealing the truth. And in doing so, she proved that justice, though it may be delayed, is never out of reach for those who believe in its power. Her story carried a message that went beyond her own experience. It was a testament to the countless individuals who have faced adversity in silence, who have endured injustice with a quiet hope that one day their voices would be heard and their truth revealed. Maya's journey was a reminder that sometimes the most profound change begins with a single unseen step, a moment of courage that no one else witnesses but leaves a lasting impact. As she stood in the precinct one evening, watching as her colleagues went about their duties with a renewed sense of purpose, Maya felt the satisfaction of knowing she had left a mark. Not through force or dominance, but through quiet conviction. She had taught them that appearances are deceiving, that true power doesn't always announce itself, and that those who judge based on surface impressions often miss the strength lying beneath. In a world that often values the loudest voice, Maya's journey showed that true empowerment lies in knowing who you are and standing firm in that truth. For every person who has felt overlooked or underestimated, she became a source of inspiration, proving that resilience, patience, and unwavering integrity are sometimes the greatest forces of all. As she turned to leave the precinct that evening, a quiet thought lingered in her mind. one she hoped would resonate with those who knew her story. In the end, strength is not in how you are seen, but in who you choose to be, even when no one is watching. And justice, though it may be silent, always finds a way to be heard. With that, Maya Turner walked away, her work complete, but her mission ongoing, a symbol of resilience, a testament to quiet courage, and a reminder to all that sometimes the most profound victories are those fought in silence, for justice, and in unwavering pursuit of what's right.